Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, and this is my educational contribution, and today is video number 279 that we have done on the reciprocal system of theory of Dewey B. Larson. Mr. Larson was an engineer in the 20th century in Western United States, I think born in North Dakota, and eventually settled out in Portland, the Portland area. And starting around 1930, he had some flashes of insight about his reciprocal system, worked out his ideas over the next 25 or 30 years, and eventually put out his two fundamental postulates, and then took those postulates and through a process of deduction deduced a theoretical universe. And I did about 15 videos back when, about 8 months ago, on that is reading through his talk that is called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System, where he goes through his 165 steps of if this and then that. Well, if this, then that. And so he's elaborating on his two fundamental postulates to create his theoretical universe, out of which he wrote books on many different topics, especially chemistry, astronomy, and physics, and then also economics and metaphysics. And the basic idea behind Larson's system is that we live in a universe of motion, not a universe of matter or a universe of energy, but the fundamental thing about the universe is that it is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Now, when Larson first formulated this, he actually referred to motion as space-time. He said the universe is made out of space-time. He eventually changed that to motion. Toward the end of his life, he actually said that when he's referring to this motion, he's really referring to change in 3 dimensions. So you could really say space-time, motion, or change in 3 dimensions. And the 3 dimensions comes from his first postulate that the universe is made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. That sets up a reciprocal relationship between space and time. They're both the same thing, except that they are reciprocals of one another. They have the same characteristics and qualities. The first of which is that they are 3-dimensional. Larson calls this coordinate space and coordinate time, XYZ coordinates, or for time, at least from our point of view, IJK coordinates. And then space and time also have their scalar aspects. And scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction, or really no particular direction. You can think of that in terms of clock time. Clock time is always moving forward, always getting later and later and later and later, but not in any particular direction. And then you can also posit clock space. And you would use a balloon with a magic marker, dots on the balloon. You blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. That is the flow of space, or the progression of space, or clock space, a scalar motion in space. And that was indeed observed by the Hubble telescope that determine that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. Okay, so the third kind of stipulation of the first postulate is that space and time are both quantized, meaning that they come only in discrete units. There's no continuity of space and time. There's a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time, and you have to have a whole unit before you have anything. And those units are small, but they are still, chunks. You have to have a chunk. And if you have one chunk of space in one chunk of time, you have the speed of light. 1 over 1 equals 1. Larson called the speed of light unit speed. And for Larson, that speed of light is the neutral point, the null point, or really even the ether, the background of this universe. So it's a universe of motion. So you have you have to be able to admit that if you have a universe of motion, then you can have motion without anything moving. And indeed, the thing that would be moving is motion itself. So motion precedes the thing that is moving. And that background, or that ether, is the speed of light outward in all directions. Larson referred to that as the progression of the natural reference system. So this motion outward at the speed of light is the natural reference system. And whereas in legacy science, the natural reference system is zero. Everything is measured from zero speed. And you can, have it moving in a positive or negative direction. +1, +2, +3, -1, -2, -3. But with the reciprocal system, you have 1 as the center, or the reference system, and your measurements are made from that. So in Larson's system, half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light. That would be 2, 3, and 4. You start with 1, and then you have to go to 2, to 3, and to 4. And then on the negative side, that would be the half of the universe that is moving slower than the speed of light. And for there, that's balanced. The cosmic sector is the cosmic sector is the sector that's moving faster than the speed of light. The material sector is moving slower than the speed of light. And then the numbers you would use there would be 1/2, 1/3, and 1/4 to balance out the 2, 3, and 4 in the cosmic sector. So these are two basically twin sectors of the universe, of which legacy science was only aware of one, only the material sector. But since there's a reciprocal relationship between space and time, what goes on in the cosmic sector, even though it is unknown to us, it is determinable, because we can extrapolate what's going on in the material sector to what's going on in the cosmic sector. All we have to do is reverse the roles of space and time. So in the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and clock time. The clock is always getting later and later and later. These are relations that we're familiar with because we reside in the material sector and we make our measurements from there and so on. But we can also determine what's going on in the cosmic sector simply by reversing the roles of space and time. So in the cosmic sector, you have coordinate time, 3 dimensions of time, and clock space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. That's just one example of being able to extrapolate what's going on in the material sector to what's going on in the cosmic sector. Okay, so he basically took that first postulate. The second postulate is not as important, but it basically says that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. Many of Larson's followers have rejected that second postulate. In particular, the idea that the geometry of the universe is Euclidean. And in fact, Larson, to a certain extent, rejected the second postulate. He recognized that the universe may not be Euclidean either, but that was the most basic way that he could confer his ideas without them getting too esoteric. He was aware of the non-Euclidean geometries that were beginning to become more popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But he kind of steered away from them. But one of his followers, Dr. Bruce Perret, championed using the projective geometry cascade. Projective geometry, so he said that the universe of geometry, the geometry of the universe is projective. Now you have what's called a geometry cascade, of which projective geometry becomes affine geometry, becomes metric geometry, becomes Euclidean geometry. So Euclidean geometry is part of projective geometry, but just a small part. So it wasn't like Larson was wrong, but just not inclusive enough. But that it will be a topic for another day. But that's one of many innovations and kind of revisions that Dr. Bruce Perret made on the reciprocal system, especially after Larson died in 1990. Perret came up, along with Dr. KVK Nehru, came up with this thing called the RS2, the Reciprocal System 2, or the reevaluation of the reciprocal system, which purported to correct a few of Larson's shortcomings, and wrote on a number of different subjects. And we're looking at one of them today, that he wrote under the pen name of Daniel Phoenix III. And usually when Perret wrote under the name of Daniel Phoenix III, he moved into much more speculative territory and wrote on subjects that I don't think Larson would have written on. But not that Larson was going to limit the application of his reciprocal system. He felt that the reciprocal system was a system. It was something that it would apply to any subject. But these are just subjects that I don't think that Larson was, interested in researching. I could be wrong. Now, this article is called Geoengineering, Chemtrails, HAARP. That's HAARP, all capitalized. World Orders, Timelines, and Ascension. Okay, the first section is called Background. I was listening to exopolitics expert Alfred Labermont on a radio show discussing the negative timeline as being some kind of synthetic quantum environment orchestrated by the gray ETs, stating that this negative timeline was all made up. Having worked as a technician on the Phoenix 3 project, more commonly known as the time travel aspect of the Montauk project, I have first-hand knowledge of what was going on and what they were trying to do. And it appears they are using some of the knowledge gleaned from those experiments in geoengineering application. In the 20 years that have passed since those experiments, I have learned much and decided to take a look at it in the context of the new knowledge provided by Dewey Larson's reciprocal system of physical theory. Phoenix 3 was a covert attempt to determine the nature of time, if it could be manipulated, and if so, the process to do it. Without going into details, the short answer is that those involved never came to an understanding of time, other than it was not what conventional physics thought it was, but were able to make use of some of the technology obtained in order to perform temporal experiments into the past and future. In order to access time, a navigation computer from a faster-than-light propulsion system was utilized to open a portal from which a visual record could be made. In later experiments, a way was found to send living organisms through this portal to other chronological periods, though this was highly dangerous and seldom worked as expected. Due to the nature of the equipment being used, only persons with a highly developed psionic or psychic ability could operate the equipment, psychics that were skilled in precognition. One of the issues was that the time travel experiments ran into a bump, literally crossing the 2012-2013 year boundary of the conventional calendar. And at the time, it appeared to be some kind of artificial reality that was constructed by the psychic running the chair. The so-called experts did not know what to make of it, but for the most part, thought it was a realistic view of the period being viewed because it was consistent with different psychics, and everyone sent forward returned with very similar information. Looking at it now, it would seem to be more consistent with a synthetic quantum environment, such as one described by Labermont, than a natural one, which may explain why it was always frozen past a specific point. With what we know now, there is a good deal of truth to what Labermont was discussing on that radio show. And that show was from August 13th, 2012. Are you on the catastrophic or positive timeline on the Global Voice radio show? He just has a footnote here called, or says that the reciprocal system was first published in the 1959 book, The Structure of the Physical Universe. And the reciprocal system is a theory of everything based on two simple postulates that produce the observed universe as a natural consequence. It has a number of notable successes, including producing the existence of quasars some 4 years before they were actually discovered. And that is true. Larson predicted quasars in detail before they were actually discovered by the scientists, based on simple deduction from his reciprocal system. Okay, moving on. Research into the strange weather being seen around the world, including the effects thereof, red rain, abiotic stress of plants with sudden death, extreme levels of radiation, and ultraviolet light, to name but a few, may have turned up what is actually going on. And it ties in with the old Montauk Project. This interpretation explains the chemtrails, HARP, geoengineering, underground cities, genetic engineering, and even explains the timelines and the upcoming ascension to a higher density. These connections cannot be seen by conventional science, but due to various misconceptions treated as fact. With the information in Dewey Larson's books, Universe of Motion, Beyond Space and Time, and the follow-up articles by Professor KVK Nehru on the nature of the stellar interior and the sunspots, what is going on starts to make a lot of sense. You think the politicians hide stuff? Try scientists. Most of the things going on are a reaction to a larger event. Find the cause, and the effect starts to make sense. So, let's start with the most obvious effect, climate change. And for that, we have to take a look at the single largest effect on weather, sunlight, and where it comes from, the sun. Okay, there's a couple of footnotes here before we get to the next section. He says, we, the scientific underground, prefer density over dimension when describing the increased complexity of organisms, since the number of spatial yang dimensions does not change, the number of available temporal yin dimensions does, resulting in a compaction that has the properties similar to the physical concept of density. Some of the misconceptions being the backward direction of stellar evolution, the omission of three-dimensional time, and the omission of the cosmic sector, or the universe of antimatter, the sector of the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light, and the nature of radiation and X-ray emission. These are things that are limiting the legacy scientists from understanding what's going on here. Okay, back to this section. It's called Stellar Evolution is Backwards. In the reciprocal system physics, Larson comes up with a better structure for the atom based on the concept of scalar motion. Again, that's a motion with a magnitude but no particular direction. And as a natural consequence of that structure determines two destructive limits for atoms, a thermal limit and an age limit. The thermal limit is the common limit used in thermonuclear reactions, but the age limit is unknown to conventional science and concerns the capture of charged electron neutrinos by the atoms that create isotopic mass. When the age limit is reached, an element becomes radioactive and explodes. When Larson applied those concepts to astronomy, he found a different mechanism for stellar combustion based on those limits. Combustion is based on exploding atoms. Fission, not fusion. And that led to the conclusion that astronomers have the stellar and galactic evolutionary sequences backwards. In Universe of Motion, Larson shows that Universe of Motion is Larson's book on astronomy. And that's one of his 3 books in the second edition of his Structure of the Physical Universe. The first one is called Nothing But Motion, which we went over. We went over that almost the entire book about 3-4 months back. So you could go back to those videos and listen to my rendition of almost the whole book of Nothing But Motion. That's the first book in his trilogy, The Structure of the Physical Universe, second edition. That book came out in 1979, and then he wrote Universe of Motion on astronomy which came out in 1984, and that is actually the third book in the series, even though it came out chronologically second. And then the second book, which came out in 1987, the third book chronologically, but the second in the series, which is primarily on chemistry, is called Basic Properties of Matter. And I believe we are going to go over a lot of that book coming up here pretty soon, Basic Properties of Matter. It's pretty fascinating reading, although very difficult, and I still haven't made heads or tails of a few of the chapters after 10 readings. But still, it's still worth taking a look at, and that's what we're going to do. But so Perret is saying, in Universe of Motion, Larson's book on astronomy, that is also a fascinating book, and we will look at some of that too. In Universe of Motion, Larson shows the consequences of what happens when you flip stellar evolution around, making red giants the youngest stars and blue giants the oldest. Backwards evolution made for a perfectly logical and consistent pattern of evolution, eliminating the need for a bunch of devices that conventional astronomy introduced to try to make sense of their interpretation. Things like dark matter, dark energy, black holes, quark stars, neutron stars, etc. When you put the sequence right, they all become just distinct stages in a single, consistent, stellar evolutionary process. As a consequence, actually, I think we're going to stop there because this section goes on a little bit and gets pretty involved. So we're going to, tomorrow, we will start up here with, as a consequence to setting the stellar evolutionary sequence straight, some conclusions are different than popular belief. And so we're going to get into some of the different conclusions that Larson arrives at in his book on astronomy, and how those relate to the ideas of geoengineering, chemtrails, HARP, and so on. Okay, thank you for tuning in. Please come back tomorrow for the next episode, and have a great day.